Chapter 1 of the Workbook. What does a boundary look like? Give me something to hope for. It's something easier to see in other people, the very thing we would do well to change in ourselves. Look again at Sherry's day. Read through the entire entries from 6 a.m. to 11:50 p.m. and see how closely your life resembles her boundaryless day. Pages 15 through 26. Where do you see yourself in Sherry's actions and thoughts? Be as specific as possible. Who in your life could be cast in the role of Sherry's mother? Page 16. Her husband, Walt, page 17, 22 through 25. Her friend, Lois, page 18. Her demanding boss, Jeff, page 19. The encouraging teacher, Miss Russell, pages 19 through 20. Her unreachable daughter, Amy, page 21. And the ministry leader, Phyllis, with yet another request, page 22. Who, who treats you the way these people treated Sherry? Whose words and actions elicit the same kind of response, emotional and otherwise, from you that these people elicited from Sherry? How did you respond to the way Sherry used Scripture as she made decisions that violated her at best shaky boundaries? If Sherry came to you for advice, what would you say to her? How would you diagnose her problem? Which of your own words of advice would you do well to heed? We can probably all identify with Sherry's dilemma, her isolation, her helplessness, her confusion, her guilt, and above all, her sense that her life is out of control. Trying harder isn't working for her. Being nice out of fear isn't working for her. Taking responsibility for others isn't working for her. Sherry still suffers severely from her inability to take ownership of her life. She has great difficulty knowing what things are her responsibility and what things are not. In her desire to do the right thing or to avoid conflict, she ends up taking on problems that God never intended her to take on. Pages 26 through 27. Look at your life through this lens. What problems have you taken on that God may never have intended you to take on? What motivated you to take on those problems you just listed? Your desires to do the right thing, your efforts to avoid conflict, your fear of disappointing someone or not being liked, a sense of guilt or inner should or something else. Any confusion of responsibility and ownership in our lives is a problem of boundaries. Page 27. Why are you confused about boundaries? About when and how to draw them for yourself, or even whether drawing boundaries is okay? What has happened to foster that confusion? Why are Christians especially susceptible to confusion about boundaries? The question listed in the introduction and below reflects some of the confusion we Christians may have about boundaries. Can I set limits and still be a loving person? What are legitimate boundaries? What if someone is upset or hurt by my boundaries? How do I answer someone who wants my time, love, energy, or money? How do I feel guilty or afraid when I consider setting boundaries? How do boundaries relate to mutual submission in marriage? Aren't boundaries selfish? Is it difficult for me to hear no from other people? Do I tend to want to control other people when I don't get what I want? Which of these questions have you wondered about? Which questions do you especially want answers for? What do you want to gain from this study besides answers to those questions? What hopes and goals do you have for yourself? As you proceed through this study and work toward the goal you have set for yourself, remember this book aims to help you see the deeply biblical nature of boundaries as they operate in the character of God, His universe, and His people. Remember, too, that our goal is to help you use biblical boundaries appropriately so that you can experience the relationship and achieve the purpose that God intends for you as His child. A little boundary clarification. Remember the story of Joshua, page 29 through 31. His parents paid his bills, fretted over his circumstances, worried about his future, and exerted much energy to keep him going. Joshua didn't study, plan, or work, yet he had a nice place to live, plenty of money, and all the rights of a family member who was doing his part. He was irresponsible and happy, and they were responsible and miserable. And remember how he helped his parents see that. We compare Joshua to a man who never watered his lawn. Whenever his neighbors turned on the sprinkler system, the water fell on Joshua's lawn. Their grass was turning brown and dying. But Joshua saw his green grass and thought his yard was doing fine. We suggested that they define the property lines a little better and fix the sprinkler system so that the water would fall on their own lawn. Perhaps then, when Joshua didn't water his lawn and found himself living in dirt, he would recognize that he had a problem and would do something about it. Page 30. Where are you where are you watering someone else's yard while your own grass withers and dies? Where are you letting someone else water your yard? Is it cruel to stop watering someone else's yard? Would it be cruel for the person who is watering your yard to stop? Why or why not? Invisible property lines and responsibility. In the physical world, boundaries are easy to see. In the spiritual world, boundaries are just as real, but often harder to see. Page 31. What boundaries in the physical world do you deal with every day? What kind of boundaries do you think need to exist in the spiritual world? What are spiritual boundaries as important as physical boundaries? The goal of this lesson is to help you define your intangible boundaries and to recognize them as a ever present reality that can increase your love and save your life. These boundaries define your soul and help you guard and maintain it. Proverbs 4, verse 23, page 31. Me and not me. Boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows where you end and someone else begins, leading to a sense of ownership. We have to deal with what is in our soul. Proverbs 14, verse 10. And boundaries help us define what that is. The Bible tells us clearly that our parameters are the how and how to protect them. But often our family or other past relationships have confused us about our parameters. Page 31 to 32. Explain how knowing what you are to own and take responsibility for gives you freedom. Why does pain result when we are not shown the parameters of our soul or are taught wrong parameters? 2 and 4. We are responsible to others and for ourselves. What does Galatians 6, verse 2 teach about responsibility to others? When has someone in your life followed Christ's example of sacrificial love, and denied himself or herself in order to do what you could not do for yourself? When have you followed Christ's example of sacrificial love and denied yourself in order to do for others what they could not do for themselves? Now look at Galatians 6, verse 5. The Greek word for burden and load give important insight into these two verses. Burden means excess burden. Boulders that we need to help carrying. Load means cargo, or the burden of daily toil. These loads are like knapsacks. A knapsack is possible to carry, and we are expected to carry our own. We are expected to deal with our own feelings, attitudes, and behaviors, as well as the responsibilities God has given us. Even though it takes effort, in addition, we are not to carry the knapsack of others. Luke 9, verse 23, pages 32 to 33. When have you acted as if your boulders are your daily load and have refused help? What are you doing this today? Where are you doing this today? When have you acted as if your daily load is a boulder that you shouldn't have to carry? Where are you doing this today? What have these two questions helped you see about yourself? And what will you do with what you have learned? In order to not stay in pain or become irresponsible, it is important that you determine what me is, where your boundary of responsibility lies, and where someone else's begins. Let's look more closely now at the nature of boundaries, page 33. Good in, bad out. Boundaries help us distinguish our property so that we can take care of it. We need to keep things that will nurture us inside our fences and keep things that will harm us outside. We need to keep the good in and the bad out. And that's what boundaries help us do. Page fences around our property are boundaries. Need gates in them so we can let out the bad when it is inside. What pain and sin do you need to get out through? Confession, so that it does not continue to poison you on the inside. Mark 7, verse 21 to 23. James 5, verse 16. And 1 John 1, verse 9. We also need these gates to let in the good that may be on the outside. We need, for instance, to receive Jesus and his truth. John 1, verse 12, Revelations 3, verse 20. We also need to open up to the good things other people want to give us. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 11 through 13. What good things from Jesus and his people would you like to be able to receive? Clearly, boundaries are not meant to be walls. The Bible does not say that we are to be walled off from others. In fact, it says that we are to be one with them. John 17, verse 11. We are to be in community with one another, but in every community, the members have their own space and property. Page 34. As a result of past injuries, have you reserved the function of boundaries? Where are you using them to keep the bad in and the good out? What pain are you holding inside rather than expressing it and getting it out of your soul? Where are you not opening up to the love and support from the outside that would bring healing? God and boundaries. This concept of boundaries comes from the very nature of God. God defines himself as a distinct, separate being, and he is responsible for himself. Page 34 to 35. God defines his personality by telling us about himself. What does he tell us in the Bible about what he thinks, feels, plans, allows, doesn't allow, likes, and dislikes? See, for instance, Genesis 12, verse 2, Jeremiah 3, verse 12, Ezekiel 6, verse 9, and 36, verse 26. God differentiates himself from his creation, from us, and from others. He tells us who he is and who he is not. What does he say about himself in Leviticus 11, verse 44? Isaiah 48, verse 12, and 60, verse 16, and 1 John 4, verse 16. God also limits what he will allow in his yard. For example, do Exodus 20, verses 1 through 17, and Matthew 5, 21, and 6, verse 4 say about those limits? What do Hosea 6, verse 6, Micah 6, verse 8, and Mark 12, verse 30 and 31, and John, 1 John 4, verses 7 through 12 say about the gates and God's fences? God also has boundaries within the Trinity. His Father, the Son, and the Spirit are one, but at the same time, they are distinct persons with their own boundaries. Each has his own personhood and responsibility. as well as a connection and love for one another. John 17, verse 24. We whom he created in his likeness and whom he gave personal responsibility within limits needs to develop boundaries like God if we are to be effective stewards over the life he has given us. Page 35.